Let's bring in our poly panel now. We're joined by Liberal MP Trent Zimmerman and we're also joined by Labor MP Josh Wilson. Welcome to you both. Great to have you on the program this morning.
I don't know how we compete with the pandas.
No, it's impossible. Don't even try. Let's start off with these booster shots from Monday to those severely immunocompromised people within our society. Trent, obviously we've had major supply issues in the past with the vaccines being available. Can you guarantee that there won't be an issue with supplies, not just for these people who are severely immunocompromised, but for the people who are yet to get vaccinated?
Yes, I can, because we've been preparing for a booster rollout. Still waiting for the health advice as to how far and wide that will go, but assuming that at some stage it might be population-wide. So we've got something like, I think, $80 million doses rather of Pfizer available over the next 2 years. We've got Novavax still to come, and we've got 15 million extra doses of Moderna for boosters as well. So we're going to be well equipped for the booster rollout, which, as you say, starts with those that are severely immunocompromised from Monday.
All right, so the supplies isn't an issue. The problem, though, Josh Wilson, as we've seen, while the supplies are not an issue, still there are some people who don't have their first vaccinations, they don't have their second vaccinations as yet, and they're blaming it too on the fact that they can't actually get it. And we're talking about regional areas, we're talking about rural areas as well. Do you think we've come so far now that we can be confident in that booster shots will be available and readily rolled out and in a much better and more effective system than we've seen in the first and second shots?
Well, you'd like to think so, but there's not much in what we've seen so far that would give you that confidence. I mean, many other countries have begun their booster programs, and we should have begun ours some time ago. We're in the position we're in because the government bungled the vaccine rollout program. There wasn't enough supply. The administrative arrangements weren't good enough. There wasn't a national information campaign, and that's partly why we're in the position we're in. So it's great to be thinking about booster shots, but we still have First Nations Australians a long way behind in terms of the vaccination rates we'd like to see, and I think it's still 1 in 3 NDIS participants that live in supported disability-specific accommodation that aren't fully vaccinated. So to talk about booster shots for vulnerable communities sort of puts the cart before the horse when we haven't actually got those communities vaccinated as yet. And we have to hold on through this, that we need to improve as we go. You only improve if you take hold of the mistakes that have already been made. If you don't hold government to account for incompetence, then you can expect incompetence to continue.
Trent, the Health Minister said yesterday that the government is expecting advice on giving boosters to the rest of the population, and specifically to people like health workers and elderly Australians, by the end of October. We were speaking earlier to epidemiologist Catherine Bennett about the importance of vaccinating the world, not only for the benefits of other countries, but also for the benefits of Australia, so that more COVID variants don't emerge. Should we be prioritising booster shots for Australians, or should we be prioritising that global effort to vaccinate people in other countries?
Well, it's a really interesting balance that we have to manage through this. And to Josh's point, a lot of countries, I think, have held off on booster shots because of that very reason, the advice from bodies like WHO that we should still be making sure the vaccine supply holds up for other parts of the world. But look, ultimately, we have to make decisions about what's in the best health interest of Australians, and that's why we are acting entirely based on the health advice that we get from our medical experts. ATAGI, the panel that looks at this, have identified in the first instance that those that are severely immunocompromised do need a booster shot. They will obviously assess whether in the short term we need to be extending that to other parts of the population. But that's about protecting the health of Australians first and foremost. And if there is a case for booster shots based on those medical reasons, then Australia should give them.
Just coming back to Australia, Josh Wilson, you're based in WA. WA, that state, continues to lag in terms of the national vaccine target. I believe the latest numbers are 68.9% have had their first jab, 50.7% are now fully vaccinated. There's a state-imposed deadline of December 31st for the state to reach 80% full vaccination. What are the challenges you're seeing in terms of reaching that target?
Well, I think the conversation about where various states are at needs to look at the big picture. We've got Western Australia, Queensland and South Australia at about the same level. Obviously, that level is behind the outbreak states, New South Wales, Victoria and the ACT. It's not hard to understand why they're ahead in terms of vaccination rates. They have the imperative of a terrible outbreak that's putting hundreds and hundreds of people into hospital and tragically costing lives. It's also seen a supply of Pfizer diverted into New South Wales and away from Western Australia at one point, and that has compromised supply. But we do need to get on with lifting vaccination rates in every part of Australia, because that's the way that we come out of the pandemic as safely as possible. We come out of the sort of the separated circumstances that we're in. And I encourage Western Australians to keep going with vaccinations, because one thing we know for sure is if you are fully vaccinated, the chances of you being hospitalised are very slight.
This is obviously a big challenge for National Cabinet. Trent, I've seen that you've been spending some time with Gladys Berejiklian, former New South Wales Premier now after she resigned. The new New South Wales Premier, Dominic Perrottet, what's his new leadership going to mean for the Prime Minister in his work with National Cabinet?
Well, they've obviously worked together extensively, both in his role, Dominic Perrottet's role as Treasurer, but they're also both Treasurers of the Commonwealth and the State, so they know each other well. We're from the same cities. So I expect that there'll be the robust but close working relationship that we've seen happen with, frankly, all premiers across the country. Of course, at times there are points of friction. National Cabinet has brought them together and has provided a forum where many of these issues can be resolved. But you always expect that competitiveness between premiers and between premiers and prime ministers from time to time.
Is it just competition, Josh Wilson? I mean, you know, this week we saw some strong words exchanged between WA and New South Wales' new premier. Will this continued, shall we call it bad blood, perhaps? Is it just friendly competition, rivalry, or will this continue to keep, you know, friends and families separated throughout this pandemic?
Well, I mean, I think Trent said it well when he talked about how the relations between the new New South Wales Premier and the Prime Minister for New South Wales are likely to continue to be pretty good. The Prime Minister is probably going to continue his sort of heroes and villains game. It's fawning admiration for whoever happens to be the Premier of New South Wales, and it's boots and all for Labor premiers. We go back to what you said before about vaccination rates. It's always Queensland and Western Australia that get mentioned, not the Liberal government in South Australia. Those of us in Queensland and Western Australia are cave people as far as the Prime Minister's concerned. He'll back Clive Palmer when it comes to our protective border measures, and I imagine that there'll be some conversations between the Prime Minister and Dominic Perrottet about the GST arrangements. We've already begun to hear those rumblings. So, you know, people in Western Australia would like to see a Prime Minister who takes a collaborative, unified approach, but that doesn't suit Scott Morrison's needs, his political needs, which are to engage in political distraction up to a point and to play that heroes and villains game when it suits him.
Do you think that's fair criticism, Trent Zimmerman? Because WA hasn't been the only one that hasn't been happy with the leadership of Scott Morrison. We've also heard from Victoria and criticism that Scott Morrison is the Prime Minister for New South Wales. What do you say to that? And is that going to play out in the federal election that we're likely to see soon?
Well, I think the proof's been in the pudding just this week, where the Prime Minister, to Josh's very point, has actually been backing Western Australia in relation to the desire of New South Wales to see further revisions of GST arrangements. And the PM's made very clear that that's not going to happen, and the beneficiary of that is Western Australia. I know that when premiers get together talking about GST carved up, it's a bit like an episode of Squid Game, but the PM in this case has been firmly on the side of Western Australia and those arrangements continuing. So I think that the PM has always seen his role to be supportive of the states wherever he possibly can. At times there'll be criticism. There's certainly been criticism flowing from the states to the Commonwealth from time to time, but the important thing is that we do have that forum like National Cabinet where these issues can be resolved. And I think overall the response of state and the federal government over the last 18 months during what hopefully is the worst crisis we experienced in our lifetimes has been one that has, when you balance the ledger, been a very positive one.
All right, Trent Zimmerman and Josh Wilson, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much for coming on. And Josh, especially to you getting up super early this morning thanks to daylight saving. Thanks both of you for your time.
And it's an exciting week for Sydney.
Yep.